disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Epstein.
I made immediate and repeated efforts to save Mary Jo by diving into the strong and murky current.
Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also.
Who masters those technologies in some way will be the master of them.
Average house prices in Dublin, €509,000.
Is that others have pointed out this excess death started and correlates with the vaccine program.
In 1932, seeking to study untreated syphilis in black men, doctors from the United States Public Health Service recruited subjects in Macon County, Alabama.
A set of human bones recovered from the wreckage of the Sewol ferry has been confirmed to be one of the students considered missing since the ferry sank in 2014.
Good evening.
Hi. Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the North of Richmond podcast. Shane, what a freaking day.
It has definitely been a day. I mean, we started out with absolutely no cell phone service, hardly at all for AT&T customers across the country. So,
and there were several others in the beginning there that were having issues too.
Yeah, we saw disturbances across Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Mint, Cricket.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much all major cell phone carriers were effectively targeted, but
right.
Yeah,
I remember when you finally were able to call me. Well, and when you were able to finally call me, I was like, what? No way. And then you sent me down detector and I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So we're not recording this morning.
Yeah, and guys, most of you guys that watch us are watching this the day after we record, or if you're listening via audio, it's usually the day of recording, sometimes the day after we record. So whether it's Wednesday or night or Thursday morning, that's usually when we record. Well, the thing is, tonight when we're recording, it is Thursday evening at 10:44 Eastern time.
8:44 out here in colorful Colorado.
Yeah, colorful Colorado. You know, I've never heard that before.
Really? That's what our state sign says. When you come into the state, it says, welcome to colorful Colorado.
Wow.
It's so cool.
It really means I need to start paying attention.
Right.
But most of the time when I come to your state, it is by aircraft. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
And yeah, one of these days,
trip.
We are going to be doing an in-person episode.
Yeah,
we haven't figured out exactly when that is, but
eventually we'll get there.
Yeah, eventually, whether it's in Colorado or Tennessee or wherever it may be.
Right, and so I want to apologize right off the bat to everybody. I said in the last episode that in this episode we'd get into Mary Jo's family and some of the aftermath in what they were thinking after everything, but I did not have time in this episode, so we'll be going over that in the final episode. Hopefully it'll be the final episode next week, but for this is really more in depth of the incident itself and the timeline of events of the evening, from the 18th and the 19th of 1969 there in July. So
yeah. And I mean, when you sent me the show notes and really started looking, I was looking at it, I was like, this is, guys, there's so much to unpack here. But it is actually condensed down, and because a lot of the notes and stuff that we have are on slides. So when we're doing it, I look at, okay, time frame, 11 slides is usually what our normal is. And I think we cut that down by 3 slides, even though there's so much more information to unpack. So there's going to be a little bit more commentary than we did on some of the last stuff, if I am guessing correctly. But I think those of you that see it on video, you'll be able to see a lot more images than the last episode. So if you guys are audio only, definitely go over to Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you see your video podcast, and take a look at them there.
Yeah, because I think the photos that we include really kind of tie the whole story together, and you can, see what some of these people look like. So with that being said, let's jump right in. So we always have a disclaimer. Please note that any information relayed in these retellings has been gathered with much attention to detail, to the best of our knowledge and capability, and any opinions expressed hereafter are ours alone. We reserve the right to disclaim that most of the research has been done through internet sources, history books, newspapers, and clips, encyclopedias, other books, and social media. Any missed, incorrect, or iffy information will be notated during the progression of each episode to the best of our ability, and no action should be taken in any way, legal or otherwise, based on the information relayed here. And with that being said, we're going to jump right in. So, the Edgartown Yacht Club in Martha's Vineyard has been around since 1905. And you can actually throw that picture back up there, Shane. This is the yacht house, I guess. Its mission, the Edgartown Yacht Club's mission, is to, quote, bring together those who have an abiding interest in yachting, sailboat racing, seamanship, and competition in the highest Corinthian spirit. The Edgartown Yacht Club annual regatta started in 1924 as a way to bring more people to the area, and soon it turned into hundreds of captains and people coming to the small town every year. The Kennedys had been sailing in the regatta for 35 years at that point, by the time Ted went in July of 1969. And this is according to multiple sources. That year, it was the 43rd annual regatta, and Ted and his crew made an appearance on his boat, the Victoria. They had not sailed in the regatta for quite a few years due to the death of John, and though Bobby had just died 1 year earlier, this year was different. Ted's crew, friends, and family members in attendance are named as follows. 39-year-old Paul Markham, and I believe I put a picture of him there. He is. He was a former U.S. attorney for the state of Massachusetts. We also had there 38-year-old Joe Gargan, Ted's cousin on his mother's side. 63-year-old John B. Crimmins, and I could not find a photo of him. I'm so sorry. But he was a longtime friend, driver, and political associate of Ted's. There was another man named Raymond LaRosa, and I cannot find much information about him. All I know is that he was a campaign worker for Ted's Senate races. And Charles Treader, who was another attorney, but also Kennedy's supporter and advisor. Ted also invited the Boiler Room Girls, 6 of whom attended, and all 6 of whom were single, young, and all in their 20s. Mary Jo Kopechne, Nance Lyons and her sister Mary Ellen, Susan Tannenbaum, Rosemary Keogh, and Esther Newberg. Wives and families were not invited, and all but one of the men were married. And the man who was not married was John Crimmins, Ted's driver. So, Cousin Joe had rented out Lawrence Cottage, Sidney Lawrence Cottage, on the island of Chappaquiddick for the weekend as a gathering place to socialize with everyone. He had also secured hotels for all of them, the women in the Katama Motor Inn and the men apparently staying in Edgartown at the Shiretown Inn. And I thought it was only Mary Jo staying at the Katama Inn, but it was actually all of them, according to several more sources I was able to find on this subject. And after a long day of sailing and regatta festivities on the island, Ted had planned a barbecue gathering at 309 Chappaquiddick Road, the Sidney Lawrence Cottage, and I did find a photo of it. And so this photo is very old. There's newer photos online. The house is blue now, which is really cool. So you guys can go and check that out if you so choose to do. So everyone would be in attendance for the barbecue, and some would even be staying the night there, perhaps out of laziness to catch the ferry back at midnight. The party started around 8:30 p.m. and lasted well into the early hours of the next morning. As I stated previously, and according to Ted, Mary Jo came up to him around 11:15 p.m. and stated that she was tired and asked for a ride back to Chappie Ferry to get back to the hotel in Katama. However, I think I pointed out in the last episode that John Crimmins was Ted's driver. Like, it was very rare that Ted would drive himself. And so it's just kind of odd in and of itself for him to go up and request the keys and then decide to drive Mary Jo somewhere, especially after he'd been drinking. But remember from Ted's college days that he liked to be the bad boy and drive without a license and drive intoxicated and things like that. And so I don't know. What do you think, Shane?
He has a well-deserved history.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there's a lot of things I could say, but we like to try to keep this show family friendly and educational. And some of the things that I have to say are not family friendly or educational. So,
no,
especially when it comes to this individual.
Yeah. No, I get it. I think it's also odd that he wasn't wearing a watch. He said he wasn't wearing a watch later on, and his time, like, he got the time apparently from John Crimmins' watch. And I don't know if he like asked John Crimmins what time it was or if he like just saw his watch or something, but like according to Ted, they left at 11:15 p.m.
Yeah, and I mean, just going through like a lot of the police reports and stuff like that, and there are a few versions of the police report, of different police reports that kind of corroborate some of what he says, but there's a lot of it that actually makes it even weirder.
Right. And I even, in my research, I even came across, and this will come in handy for the next episode, but I came across the actual court paperwork for the inquest.
Yeah, that's definitely
online.
going to.
So I'm going to read it and we're going to talk about it, guys. Cause like, ooh, I love direct sources like this. Like, I don't like just reading the reiterations of other people. I love finding the stuff for myself and like reading it. So I'm excited to dive into that.
Yeah, I do want to read those too myself, but
I'll send you the link.
Looking at some of the police reporting and different things that was said that night and different things that was seen that night, none of it really makes a whole lot of sense.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
And I mean, if you take into account like where the body was found and how the body was found, and I mean, there's some of it that I was just like, is it plausible? Yes. But what else was going on? Because
Mm-hmm.
as stated, he was kind of a bad boy. And he earned his reputation.
And he got away with a lot of things
That
because of
normal
who his
people
family
wouldn't.
was.
So if Haley, I have a question. If it was you or myself, do you think we would get away with any of this?
No, we'd still be rotting in prison. Guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
That we have politicians who commit these crimes, and going back to something that was said on the campaign trail back in 2015 for Donald Trump, he said, I could basically kill somebody on Fifth Avenue and be a free man.
Mm-hmm.
And what it illustrates is that people with power, and I'm not talking about, oh, they're in a specific office or not. Power and money are synonymous with each other. So
Right.
anybody, if somebody has power, it's, and Dan Bongino actually says it pretty effectively too. It's not even about money, it's information. If you have information over somebody else, you have power over them.
Right.
And that's where a lot of this comes from, is all these people not only had money, but they actually had influence, and they actually had information that could sink a lot of powerful people within the government and elsewhere. So there's a lot of the, I'm a bad boy, I'm going to do what a bad boy does, and there ain't nothing you can do to stop me because I know every single person that's involved or that's going to be there, and I know dirty, dark secrets about each and every single one of them.
Right. And it's still like that to this day. And I feel like it's always been like that with the people who lead the masses. You know what I mean?
That's why they're supposed to be civil servants,
Yeah.
not leaders.
Yeah. But they're not, are they?
There are a few good civil servants that are still in the government, and we do want to give them a shout out, but there's not a whole lot left that are there anymore.
No. But let's continue on here. So Ted either asked what time it was, or he just looked at John Crimmon's watch, whatever. Okay. Now, something you need to understand about Ted is that he was extremely unfaithful to his wife, according to many, many sources. This is not me making this assumption. There's ample evidence of it and recollections of it across everywhere. Okay. And by the 1970s, his marriage to Joan was actually extremely on the rocks. Like, it was not just due to adultery, but also they were struggling hardcore with alcoholism. And it's also said that Bobby was unfaithful to his wife, and some even speculate that Bobby attempted to seduce Mary Jo. But I'm not going to speculate on that. Based on what we now know of Mary Jo, I guarantee you she would have never gone for that in any way. She seemed to have great virtues and standards, high morals. I mean, I just won't entertain that idea that Mary Jo would have just forgone the entirety of her upbringing, her morals, her values for the sake of powerful men wanting to have affairs. I do not believe that she would have done that. So Mary Jo allegedly asks Ted to take her back to the ferry, which left at midnight. Okay, Ted gets the keys from his driver and they leave. But Mary Jo left her purse and her hotel room key at the party at Lawrence College. or cottage. Wow, college, good grief. Which is just like super odd, okay? That to me seems like she was expecting to come back. If she were heading back to her hotel, she'd be bringing her purse and her hotel key. She also didn't tell anybody else at the party that she was leaving, which is extremely unusual because I don't know about you, Shane, but when I'm at a party with a bunch of my friends, especially friends that I just went through this extremely traumatic experience with, of losing our boss who was running for president, and then the month before having to host a gala to help raise finances for paying off his campaign debts. I don't think I would have left a party without saying goodbye to all of them, especially because they're all from out of town, you know? Like, when are you going to see them again?
See, things back then, the women actually stuck together.
Right.
And they didn't just go off and leave without, because back then, even if you were in your 20s, there's still like a chaperone type mentality that all these women were there as chaperones to one another.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And they would have been extremely close with how long they had been working together, you know? Like, I just don't see Mary Jo as the type of person to be that introverted so that she just leaves a party without telling anybody.
Well, and there's nothing to indicate that she did.
Exactly.
That's where a lot of this more strange behavior comes into play, is we don't know what's going on.
Mm-mm. And we never will, unfortunately, but that's why we're here to present the facts and let you guys decide, the viewers.
And I mean, quite honestly, a lot of these people will never be held to account because A, they're dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And B, nobody has the temerity anymore to actually hold them to account.
Nope.
That's one of the worst parts about the politicization of our government now, is we have, it's a right-left paradigm, and nobody wants to hold each other to account. I mean, the Democrats want to hold Donald Trump to account, but yet if you look at their own party and their own ranks, it's not that way within their own party. But yet Republicans will hold their own party members to account. They'll kick them out of Congress. Look at George Santos.
Right? Freaking A.
Even though they're holding a slim majority, they're going to kick a member of their own party out, even though because he did some things that were not ethical. He lied to the American people. He did a whole bunch of things that were unethical.
I mean, they've all lied to the American people and done a whole bunch of things that were unethical. But I think the difference between that and Kevin McCarthy and what he did is he was making backhand deals behind the backs of his constituents, you know?
George Santos is the one I'm talking about.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Kevin McCarthy.
No, George Santos.
I forgot about him.
From New York.
I forgot it about him.
Yeah, he was completely kicked out of Congress.
Right.
And yeah, we could go into a whole discussion about that, but it doesn't. The thing is it don't really matter. We just have to focus now on, when we're talking about politics and we're talking about people, we need to focus on holding our own party members to account as well as the other party. Exactly. If you're going to be the standard bearer of no one is above the law, make sure you can clean your own closet first. Because if you can't,
and we're not talking about the random closets in Congress where people make sex videos.
No, that wasn't a random closet. That was actually on the Senate floor.
On the Senate floor? I thought it was in a random locker room of theirs.
No, it was actually out in the public area.
Oh, that's even worse. Oh my God, guys. Don't look up to the members of Congress, guys. Just
We have, and these are congressional aides. So you would expect a little bit better. And yes, both people have been held to account. They no longer have jobs, and they no longer can get jobs in Congress at all.
And that's good. I missed that part. So anyways.
It's been a mini cycle.
Right. It's the world we live in, guys. The world we live in. Okay, so what we know of Mary Jo's personality, I don't think she would have left the party without saying bye to people. But I don't know. With Ted driving, most likely drunk, the pair left number 309, traveled up Chappaquiddick Road, and I've got a map here so you can see the location of that little red dot. I should have made that a little bigger. I'm sorry, guys. But they headed up Chappaquiddick Road, okay? Beginning what is mapped as a 27-minute drive back to Chappie Ferry, which is the name of the ferry for you guys. And you can see here the intersection of Chappaquiddick Road and Dyke Bridge Road. Okay, so the road to the ferry, Chappaquiddick Road, or the main road, I've heard it called multiple things, was paved the whole way. Okay, with one left turn, and you can see that on. I gotta get used to this green screen thing. It's the opposite. Anyways, you can see it there. It would have been a left-hand turn, a very hard left-hand turn to take them the rest of the way to the channel crossing. Ted says that he accidentally turned right onto Dyke Road. Okay. Now, Dyke Road is an unpaved dirt road with a random turn onto a wooden bridge. And this leads to a location of Chappaquiddick Island that it's called Tom's Neck Point. And I guess it's a popular fishing spot, and we'll talk about that here in a little while. Now, all of these photos on screen here are from recent years. After the Chappaquiddick incident, this bridge had guardrails installed on it to help prevent anything like this from happening again. And so, I guess it's working because I haven't heard of any other big car crashes on this bridge, but I'll look into that for next time, and we'll see if there are any others. But let's talk for a moment about part-time Deputy Sheriff Christopher Look. So Deputy Look was working on the regatta dance as a gate guard on the island that night to provide some extra security and such. And he got off a little before 12:30 a.m. early in the morning of July 19th, 1969. He was able to take a private boat owned by the yacht club back to Chappaquiddick Island because it was after the last Chappie ferry of the night. And I read in my research that the Chappie ferry, if you needed an extra ferry after the last one had already made its run, you could call from the phone booth at the ferry landing and arrange for another ferry to come and get you. But Deputy Look decided to just take a yacht boat from the yacht club. So he then drove from Chappie Ferry down Chappaquiddick Road, coming the opposite direction from where Ted was coming. So Ted was trying to head to the ferry, right? And Deputy Look is coming the other way towards Lawrence Cottage. He was trying to head home, of course. And once he took that sharp right turn onto Chappaquiddick Road, he saw a car approaching and then stop on the side of the road near Cemetery Road around 12:40 a.m. Most likely, though, a little bit after 12:40. Deputy Look noticed two people in the car, a man and a woman, and thought that they might actually be lost. And so they were parked on the opposite side of where he was traveling, just after the sharp turn in the road. Okay. Coming from Chappie Ferry, you can either turn right and continue on Chappaquiddick Road, which is the sharp turn I was just talking about, or go straight onto Dyke Bridge Road, which is why he thought they could be lost. Deputy Look decided to pull over and see if they needed help, but as he approached the car, it reversed towards him and then just took off rather rapidly, turned onto Dyke Bridge Road, and well, we know the rest. If Ted and Mary Jo left at 11:15 p.m. on the 18th and crashed not long after, why were they seen a little over an hour and a half later? If Mary Jo was trying to go to her hotel, why hadn't she said goodbye and taken her purse with her? If Ted liked to be adulterous against his wife with other women, could he have attempted to make a move on Mary Jo and, dare I say it, against her will? And when he realized what he had done, did he try and get rid of her? Or was this truly an accident? All I'm saying is that there are so many things that are not adding up here, and we are not the only people recounting this story who have brought up these points, all right? Unfortunately, we will never know the truth of this. But I can give you the rest of the facts, like I said earlier, and you can decide for yourself. So Deputy Look did not hear the crash, as the bridge is about a mile down, crossing a connection point between Poocha Pond and Cape Pogee Bay. I think I said that right. I hope so. And you can see it here in the picture right here. So Cape Pogee Bay is up a little further. And there's, I think there's another photo that's zoomed out just a little bit more. There we go. So there's Cape Pogee Bay and then Poocha Pond down there at the bottom. So he didn't think anything else of the car, but he made a mental note of the license plate and just went on home. All right. And he did also note in his mind as well that it was an Oldsmobile 88, which is the same style, make and model of the car that Ted had. He actually came across some more of the Lawrence Cottage party, and it's kind of funny because they were dancing down Chappaquiddick Road in a conga line, and so he stopped and asked if they needed a ride. And so the people he saw were Raymond LaRosa, Mary Ellen, and her sister Nance Lyons, and they declined him, but they did corroborate later seeing him when asked, but they weren't sure what time the exchange had happened. Many sources state that we don't really know what time Ted's car made its plunge off of Dyke Bridge because of the contradictions between Ted's retelling and Deputy Look's testimony. But it seems to me that the actual time of that the car went off the bridge would have been closer to 1 a.m., if not just a little bit after, perhaps. But I don't know. I don't know. If Deputy Look is to be believed, and honestly, he doesn't have a reason to lie, I would consider that he didn't even know whose car it was when he saw it. Okay? Like, this man had no reason to lie. So I don't know. But Ted had a reason to lie. The car had landed on its roof, and Ted escaped the car. He claims to have called Mary Jo's name several times from shore and then rested on the bank for 15 minutes. After resting, he says he attempted between 7 and 8 times to rescue Mary Jo from the car, unsuccessfully. He then walked back to Lawrence Cottage, which took another 15 minutes. He passed by several homes, a few even having lights on while making his way back. One woman, Sylvia Malm, owned Dyke House, and she stated to police later that she had been home, had a working phone, and leaves lights on after she goes to bed usually. Therefore, her house would have been visible from the road. Upon arriving back at the cottage, Ted did not alert everyone at the party of what had just happened. He simply and quietly grabbed his cousin Joe Gargan and his friend Paul Markham. They all went outside to a Plymouth that was parked in the dirt driveway, and Ted fell into the back of it and explained what had happened to Joe and Paul. Joe then drove the three of them back to Dyke Bridge to assess the situation. Joe and Paul attempted to rescue Mary Jo from the car. And I misspoke last episode. The pond that the car went into, it's a tidal pond, and we showed it on the map a little bit ago. It wasn't a still water pond like I thought, okay? And so there would have been a little bit of a tidal current, according to some sources, and Paul and Joe could not get her out of the car because the current was just a little bit too strong. And I can't imagine being Mary Jo in that moment, potentially knowing people were swimming down to try and rescue her. When they realized that they couldn't get her out, Joe drove Ted and Paul back to Chappie Ferry, where they all stood around and debated what to do. They were all experts of law at one point or another, but none of them chose to contact anyone for help, even with a payphone booth standing nearby. Remember, I said there was a phone booth that you could request another ferry, right? According to the recountings, both Paul and Joe insisted to Ted that authorities needed to be notified, but Ted said no, and neither of them could be bothered to call the police themselves. And this bothers me so much. It is not that hard to do the right thing, friends. It really is not. It doesn't matter who you are. It is not hard to just be a good person and do the right thing. And instead of calling themselves, they left Ted at the ferry landing and went back to Lawrence Cottage, never mentioning to the rest of the party that Mary Jo was in an accident, that she was stuck in the car, or that she was running out of air while they all continued to drink and have fun. So, Jane, what do you think? What do you think about that? Because this makes me so angry.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of information that. Okay, so let's take a regular vehicle, for instance, because I do want to add a little bit more information in there, because it's very interesting when people are trying to, and I understand where you're coming from. So don't get me wrong, but when a vehicle's filling with water, the vehicle has to be completely full before you could even open the doors.
Right.
And if they don't have blunt objects, they can't make that car fill up fast enough.
No, not at all. But
and if it's a true tidal current too, which I actually looked up the tidal. I went, because you can look at the tides going all the way back into the 40s. Ooh. About that time, it would have been it'd be what's considered a mid tide, not a high tide, not a low tide, but it's between. So that vehicle would have been full of water inside of about 6 hours, completely full. So
right.
That's the worst part about this is when the vehicle would have went into the water, if the window would have gotten broken right away, like they could have punched it out, Mary Jo Kopechny would still be here.
Yeah.
Still to this day.
Well, and we'll talk about John Farrar here in a little bit, but he was the captain of the fire station, and he was also an experienced scuba diver. And he said that had he been called, he'd have had her out in like 10 to 30 minutes.
But he was trained with the proper tools.
Yep.
And going back to some of the things that we talk about in other videos that we do, not just in regards to the podcast, but we have, everybody needs to understand and be prepared. So if you were to ever take a dump in your vehicle into a pond or something, that you can actually get yourself and your family or whoever's with you out, because it is very important. That is honestly, that's one of the reasons those hammers became so widespread after the fact, is because of the Mary Jo Kopechne.
Yeah.
I found that out from one of the firefighters that I talked to, who does Uber here in Wilmington. And he said
that's interesting. I didn't
they're
realize
called
that.
Kopechne hammers.
Interesting.
Especially in New York, where pretty much all this stuff happened.
Oh wow. Well, Massachusetts, but
yeah, Massachusetts, but like everybody was from the New York, Massachusetts area.
Right. I think what's making me so mad about this, though, is it would have been so easy for them to just call for help. And I want to know why none of them did. I understand why Ted didn't, but I want to know why Joe and Paul didn't.
Because, well, let's be realistic. They're all drunk. They were all driving. They're all drunk. And not a single one of them could afford a DUI because they all had positions. All those positions would have been taken.
That's not good enough. No,
I understand it's not good enough, and it's not good enough for me either. But these, like we say at the beginning of every episode, people see it on the screen. It takes 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds, we make decisions, and when we're talking about the 10 seconds that could have saved Mary Jo Kopechne's life, they chose to do the exact opposite. And then not only did they make that active decision not to try to save her, but they continued to make decisions not to save her.
Yeah, and I think that's what bothers me so much about this case, is because they had so many opportunities to be able to just decide differently, and they didn't, and it makes me mad, but it is what it is. So they left Ted, right, and went back to the party, okay? And then Ted swam 500 meters from Chappie Ferry to Edgartown, walked the short distance to Shiretown Inn, and passed out sometime around 2:30 in the morning, okay? The next morning, a man and his son were walking up Dyke Road towards the bridge, okay? And this was to get to Tom's Neck Point, okay? And you can see on the other side there, that kind of long part of the island that Dyke Bridge connects, that is Tom's Neck Point. And like I said, it was a popular fishing spot. I'm sure it still is to this day. As the man and his son were crossing Dyke Bridge, the man's son spotted the car in the water. You could easily see it. As we showed in the last episode, the car had landed on its roof, and they couldn't tell if anyone was in it. It took the man and his son another 10 minutes to be able to contact police to get them out to the scene. They had spotted the car right after 8 a.m., and the first one on the scene was the police chief, James Arena, right around 8:30. Okay. And here he is. He jumped into the water and tried to look inside of the car himself. He realized he actually would need some help, so he called John Farrar, the Edgartown fire rescue captain. All right. And he was a trained scuba diver, like I said. and he brought equipment to be able to properly examine the car, and upon doing so, discovered Mary Jo's body near the back windshield. And this is common, I guess, in car drownings, especially if the car, because the engine is weighing down the front of the car, okay? And so most of the time, the back of the car is going to be kind of up in the air, and so that air pocket that is left inside the car is going to be near that back windshield. And so most of the time, drowning victims in car crashes end up being found in the back. And so it's kind of terrifying to think about. And so I'm just going to move on. It actually took him all of 10 minutes to get her out of the car. And he had been called, had he been called when the incident happened, she most likely could have survived, according to many reports, including John Farrar's own testimony later. Like I said before, he said that he could have had her out within 10 to 30 minutes. And considering that car was kind of slowly filling up with water, that Mary Jo would have had plenty of time had someone been called. But they weren't. We may never know why, but that's whatever. We're going to resign ourselves to the fact that we may never know the answers to these questions, but we can form our own opinions. The men on the scene summoned equipment to haul the car out of the pond after recovering Mary Jo's body, and Chief Arena searched the vehicle, finding Rosemary Keogh's purse in the front glove box. And this actually made him think that the woman they found was Rosemary at first, not Mary Jo. And around the time that the man and his son discovered Ted's car, Paul Markham and Joe Gargan were heading back to Chappie Ferry and Edgartown to speak with Ted again. Once they met up with him, they headed back to Chappie Ferry and the island. Upon arriving back, they stood around talking again about what to do, both Joe and Paul urging Ted to do the right thing. Ted, just do the right thing. Just call the police. They could have done the right thing the night before, but whatever. It is what it is. Ted went into the phone booth near the ferry pier, okay, but not to call the police. Oh, no. Instead, he called some more friends in high places, including Democrat Congressman John Tunney from California. I'm unsure how these conversations went, but I should hope that the people that he called were shocked and told him he should have already contacted authorities, but who knows? Who knows? Once finished with these calls, Ted finally decided to go to the Edgartown police to report the accident, but only after discovering somehow that his car had been found along with Mary Jo. So Paul took Ted to the police station, and Joe went to the Katama Shores Motor Inn to tell the rest of the Boiler Room girls what happened to Mary Jo. It was 9:50 in the morning when Ted strode into the Edgartown Police Department, and Chief Arena was not there. He was on his way back from dealing with Ted's crime scene. Ted asked the secretary where he could make some more phone calls, and she stated he could use the chief's office. Now, in the movie Chappaquiddick that was made in 2017 about this incident, this is the scene where they show Ted calling his father, Joseph Sr. I actually have no confirmation that he did, in fact, call his father, but I'm almost betting that he did somewhere in all of the phone calls he made. Joseph Sr. by this time had been incapacitated for quite a few years due to a stroke. But what he could say as advice to his youngest son, his last living son, I'm sure was not compassionate towards Ted's victim, but instead protectionary advice. Find a way to not be at fault. Ted was pegged to be the next nominee for president in 1972. Hell, even the next president, right? He needed a way out. After using the phone, Ted went into a conference room with Paul Markham and dictated to him his statement, which Paul wrote out. The most complete version of this statement for this case can be found on the Wikipedia page for this case, but I'm actually just going to read it to you because I feel it's important to hear his own words. Okay? On July 18th, 1969, at approximately 11:15 p.m. in Chappaquiddick, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, I was driving my car on Main Street on my way to get the ferry back to Edgartown. I was unfamiliar with the road and turned right onto Dyke Road instead of bearing hard left on Main Street. After proceeding for approximately 1/2 mile on Dyke Road, I descended a hill and came upon a narrow bridge. The car went off the side of the bridge. There was one passenger with me, one Miss Mary Jo Chappaquiddick, a former secretary of my brother, Senator Robert Kennedy. The car turned over and sank into the water and landed with the roof resting on the bottom. I attempted to open the door and the window of the car, but I have no recollection of how I got out of the car. I came to the surface and then repeatedly dove down to the car in an attempt to see if the passenger was still in the car. I was unsuccessful in the attempt. I was exhausted and in a state of shock. I recall walking back to where my friends were eating. There was a car parked in front of the cottage, and I climbed into the back seat. I then asked for someone to bring me back to Edgartown. I remember walking around for a period and then going back to my hotel room. When I fully realized what had happened this morning, I immediately contacted the police. End quote. Alibi. Protection. No fault. Accident. Not long after Chief Arena arrived back at the department, and Ted presented him with this statement for the record, written by Paul. He reiterated that the statement was true while the chief typed it into the typewriter for the record. It was at this point that Chief Arena learned the true identity of the woman found in the car, Mary Jo Chappaquiddick. And I can't imagine what was going through the chief's mind while typing this statement. And if he was a good officer, investigator, he'd have seen right through it. We will never know, at least from the sources I've found, whether he was paid off to look the other way. But at least now we can deduce that he must have been, because when y'all hear what happened in the inquest and how little punishment Ted got for all of this, and just like everything, there's still so much that we need to go over, and that'll all be gone over in the next episode. But I don't know. That's just my humble opinion. I think that he might have been paid off or something. So the coroner happened to be off that day, July 19th, 1969, but the assistant coroner, Donald Mills, was on duty. When he got to the scene of the accident where he made his first assessment of Mary Jo's death, he deduced immediately that she had most likely drowned. Well, what we know now, based on other cases of drownings in cars in addition to this one, is that she most likely had quite a few hours. And Shane, you even mentioned potentially 6 hours. I was estimating, based on some of the sources I was reading, that it could have been, an hour or two before running out of air, but it could have been much longer, and she could have been saved. I'm convinced.
Well, her body was found at 8:20 in the morning, give or take 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If they went off the bridge at 12:40, between 12:40 and 1:15, even at the fastest estimates, so of the water flow and everything like that, and in those pictures when he was sitting on the car, that was high tide.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we need to understand, that when they went off, yes, there was probably a current, but a grown man could stand in that water and be up to probably the chest.
Mm-hmm.
and still see over the vehicle. Like
Right.
the bottom of that vehicle is not completely done. So when we're talking about this, she with no broken glass, nothing. If it was me, and I've seen drowning simulators and different things like that, and CPR training and different things like that, she most likely had about 2.5 to 3.5 hours.
2.5 to 3.5. Okay.
So I mean, let's figure at the worst case scenario that she had 2.5 hours. 1:30, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
That's quite a while.
Right.
And what they don't talk about is if somebody's terrified, rigor's going to set in faster.
Mm-hmm.
So actual TOD is not in cold water is going to be obscured, and the fact that she was slowly dying from suffocation and drowning, she was terrified.
Right.
Rigor would have set in so fast that to actually get an accurate TOD, almost impossible without actually doing a liver probe. And as far as any of the records that I've found, they did not do any of that.
Well, and then John Farrar thought that she could have died from suffocation because, like, his opinion, he had his reasons because he found her body was in the back of the car, right where the air pocket would have been. And I don't know. I don't think, personally, I don't think that she drowned. I think she most likely would have suffocated because that air pocket, there's no more fresh air coming in there. Eventually it's going to get to a point where it's going to become unbreathable because you're breathing out carbon dioxide and then having to breathe it back in. Like, and what an awful, just.
But yeah, there was still a breathable. I mean, according to all records that I've found, there was still an area of that vehicle that did not have any water.
Right.
So
but it is what it is.
But even a small area like that, I mean, let's say it was a foot by a foot.
Mm-hmm.
That would have taken 2 hours to go through as well. So
right.
Even if it took 2.5 hours for that entire space, that small area that she would have had, that would have taken another 2 hours.
Right.
To completely be gone. No more usable oxygen. So you're talking potentially 4.5 hours. Now we're in the early morning hours. We're talking 5 a.m.
Right.
So she would have only been dead for 3 hours when they found her. If it stretched out as far as possible, I should say.
Right. Well, and rigor mortis from beginning to end can take anywhere from 48 to 60 hours even. So, like, with her just being in the beginning stages, but also terrified at the time of her death, I mean, her joints were stiff when they found her.
Yeah, and it was cold water. The water at that time was, they said 30, that particular area, it was still like 48, just shy of 50 degrees. And we were just coming into the beginning parts of June, just the beginning parts of the summer before the water even really heats up.
Yeah. So it would have been mid-July, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like I'm gonna have to pull up what the water temperature was that day, but
Right.
it was in the 50s.
I
Terrified
believe
woman,
it.
drunk, running out of air,
Mm-hmm.
cold water. What happens when you deal with cold water? Your joints stiffen up, and they
Yep.
stiffen up fast.
Right.
And that's what helps that rigor set in even faster than what you'd normally see.
Right. When I don't even know. Let's continue because I still have a lot we gotta go over here.
Yep.
But so nobody's opinions seemed to be mattering, even John Farrar's. The medical examiner on staff that day thought that it just immediately was like she drowned. Deputy Look was saying, well, I saw Ted's car. Didn't matter. And it's because Senator Ted Kennedy was the owner of the car. Okay. It was debated whether an autopsy was necessary, being that the deduction was that she had drowned. The only thing done along those lines was a blood sample from her body, which showed an alcohol content of 0.09%. She was pretty intoxicated, 3 times the modern legal limit in most states to drive. An autopsy was not done to determine if she had suffocated or drowned, and there is no way of knowing if there was really water in her lungs beyond the rudimentary examination at the scene. Mary Jo was almost immediately released for embalming and her funeral, which would take place on July 22nd in Plymouth, Pennsylvania, her childhood home, in the same cemetery that she and Georgetta used to play in. And I guess I didn't have as much as I thought left, because this is where we are going to end this week's episode, and we will pick back up with Mary Jo's funeral next week. We'll also go over the inquest. Like I said, we're both going to read, and Shane, I'll send them to you, but we're both going to read the court documents for the inquest. We're going to go over some of the years afterwards, Ted's career and how he was viewed nationally after this case. I even have the footage of his statement to the people of Massachusetts after the incident. So we're going to watch that too. It's going to be good.
So, just in closing, I guess, thank you guys for sticking around for another hour of the Ted Kennedy and the Chappaquiddick Incident.
Yeah.
And stay tuned for next week, because guess what? Next week is going to be even wilder than this week.
Yeah.
This week, Haley, you did a really good job. I'm glad that you were able to do all this research, because guess what? Not a clue. I mean, I helped a little bit, but not near the research side of it.
But you've got the tech side of it, so it's fine.
But
we wouldn't have
always,
pictures
guys,
without you.
Like, share, follow.
Yes.
Send
all
this
the things.
to all your friends. Go subscribe over on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Facebook, all the places you go to get your
Amazon
podcast from.
And follow our TikTok, north.of.richmond.
Yep, and we are releasing all the video of each episode every week on TikTok. So,
yes.
Until next
all
time,
right, stay safe, everybody.
Yep.
Have a great week.
Have a great night.